7:37 on Hudson Valley Focus Live on this Monday morning. As promised, Jeff Feldman, attorney, in studio with me. Good morning, Mr. Feldman.
Good morning. How are you? Thanks for having me again.
I'm doing well, and I really enjoyed the conversation that we had the last time. I've tried to drive home the point that individuals, whether it's in their own personal or particularly business people, having those relationships with attorneys, accountants, bankers, insurance person, all very, very important.
Electricians, plumbers.
Absolutely. Gas people.
Right.
In the legal field, and this is something I think we really, would like to make this point for sure. Lots of folks who have never had broad experience with attorneys. Well, an attorney is an attorney. Nothing could be further from the truth any more than
agreed.
A doctor is a doctor. The areas of specialty, and whether in medicine or law, very, very, very diverse.
Exactly. I mean, you wouldn't want an electrician who never wired a four-way switch to do it for the first time in your house.
Right.
Okay. So the analogy runs over to every specialty, and I mean, everybody has to learn in some way, shape, or form.
Yes.
My dad was an electrician. He was a great mentor to other younger electricians. You need to, as a young lawyer or a young doctor, you need to apprentice for somebody who really knows how to do things correctly and to teach you how to do them the right way.
Yes, and when you were here last, I don't remember if the microphones were off or the microphones were on, and we were talking about specific case involving maritime law, which in itself is its own specialty that goes back literally hundreds of years, and so knowing who handles that situation. We're going to specifically talk this morning about and I believe this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is a pro bono case that
Correct.
your firm is involved with.
It's over.
Okay.
It's over.
It's over. And if you could outline the details, origin of this, please.
Sure. So right in the beginning of COVID, late March 2020, early April 2020, the family that we represented, the husband was a volunteer driver for an ambulance corps locally here in the Hudson Valley. Mm-hmm. He contracted COVID. Again, this is in the very early stages of the shutdown when testing was being experimented with. The doctors were learning about the ways to treat and not to treat, and everything was new. He was hospitalized for a considerable period of time, and then unfortunately, towards the end of April of 2020, he passed away. The ambulance squad processed an application to provide the widow with the life insurance benefits that were available to the volunteers on the squad, and the insurance company, the life insurance company, denied the claim. And a local lawyer who was familiar with this situation reached out to me and asked whether or not this was something that we would be willing to handle. He could not. And I spoke to my partners. I spoke to the people from the ambulance squad, and I spoke to the widow, and we agreed to take on this case and not charge her a fee so that she would reap the benefit of the entire life insurance policy. So that's a little bit of the background in a nutshell.
And if I understand this, the other attorney involved was a workers' compensation attorney?
No, that came later.
Oh, that came later.
That came later.
So this is important because these are the subsets of specialty within the field of law.
Correct. Exactly what you were asking about in the beginning, which I'm guessing was not a coincidence. So what happened was the lawyer who called me couldn't handle it for a variety of reasons. We agreed to handle it. And then the position that the life insurance company took which was not and is not unusual under these circumstances for reasons which I can explain, was, well, how do we know that the gentleman got COVID while he was working on the ambulance rig, as opposed to going to a convenience store, being somewhere in public, or doing something else?
Yes.
Okay. And similar situations arose during the summer of 2020 and thereafter with other first responders, firemen, police officers, people who work in hospitals, corrections officers who contracted COVID and passed away. So according to the widow, the decedent, the person who passed away, because he was working on the ambulance and because this was high risk, he stayed to himself. The only reason he left the house was to work on the ambulance. He didn't have any physical contact with his wife or his family, and he stayed separated from everyone. He didn't go anywhere other than to go and drive on the ambulance.
Yes.
And it would be the widow's testimony in that regard that would be the proof that the only way he could have gotten it would have been driving the rig. Now, obviously, the complicating factors are he could have transported someone who was, like, for example, in a car accident, had a broken leg, was otherwise fine. There would be no way for him or anyone else to know, based upon HIPAA, that that person that was transported ultimately came down with COVID a day or two later, and that person was in the infectious stage and he could have got it from them. Or walking through the ER, taking somebody into, a bay, could have, been in contact with a doctor or a nurse or some other person and got the COVID that way. So the insurance company took that position, and that made things more complicated, and so the situation had to be litigated for some period of time. So what we did was we reached out to our friend Peter Cordovano, who's a workers' compensation lawyer over in Highland, and asked him to handle the workers' compensation benefit aspect of this, because the family was also entitled to workers' compensation benefits in addition to the life insurance.
Correct.
So the reason for doing that with Peter was there's this theory of law called collateral estoppel, which is kind of complicated in a murky area, but the basic principle is that a decision by one deciding authority, let's say, can be held to be applicable to someone or some entity that was not involved in that proceeding. So bottom line, if we got a favorable ruling from the Workers' Compensation Board that this individual was in the course of his work with the ambulance squad,
contracted,
and he contracted it in the context of working with the ambulance squad, that finding would be binding on the life insurance company, even though they were not a party to the workers' compensation proceeding. And so Peter handled that aspect of the case. There were hearings. The people from the state insurance fund who had the workers' compensation benefits were able to get records. They were able to cross-examine the widow and ask her questions at the hearing. And then the Workers' Compensation Board ultimately did determine that the individual did contract COVID during the course of his work with the ambulance squad, and that his death resulted. And so we argued in the Supreme Court case, New York Supreme Court case, that finding by the Workers' Compensation Board was binding on the life insurance company.
Attorney Jeff Feldman, Kleidman, Collins, the Sappe LLP attorneys at law in studio with me. We're going to take a quick break and then back with more on WKIP. $7:53 on Hudson Valley Focus Live on WKIP. Attorney Jeff Feldman in the studio with me, talking about the pro bono case that they handled. And I want to say one more time, Attorney Feldman, when folks need legal representation, please make sure that they're looking at the area of specialty. Your area of specialty in the medical field, it's a different language. It understanding the language, the terminology, what expert witnesses you reach out to, all of these are absolutely relevant facets of successfully handling a case.
Absolutely critical to being able to understand and appreciate the nuances of the medical issues. This case is a great example because of our involvement with lots of different physicians and the physician groups that we represent. I was able to reach out to different infectious disease physicians and ask them questions. And as the knowledge base about COVID and testing for COVID and treatment of COVID was evolving, as the physicians learned more and more based upon additional experience as the pandemic continued, that was helpful in being able to put together a timeline and understanding the nuances of when this individual was working, when he wasn't working, when he contracted the first symptoms, the issues with the initial testing because he tested negative multiple times during the initial portions of his hospitalization. He didn't test positive until almost right before he passed away, and he was in the hospital in intensive care for several weeks.
Wow.
And again, this was at a time where your family couldn't visit you, people were dying alone, the old sad story that we've all lived through.
And that really was so difficult. I can imagine that going forward from here, as we do learn more, retrospectively, there, other individuals may be involved in litigation, and it's just a unbelievable time certainly in my lifetime in terms of how this impacted all of society.
And still continues to.
Yes.
I mean, if you talk to anybody, whether it's, we're constantly looking to hire more lawyers, but it doesn't matter what business you're in, whether it's a restaurant or electrical contractor, plumbing contractor, physicians' offices, everybody's looking for help. And I don't know where the people are, but you can't find help. They're working somewhere, they're paying their bills, but everybody's in need of help.
Jeff Feldman, you just bring up a point that I reinforce a point that I've tried to make over and over and over again. We need all of these skill sets in order for a society to function.
Right. I mean, without question. I mean, there's no argument.
And I said it many times long before COVID. If you look at one of our local hospitals and the housekeeping services. How important are the housekeeping services in a hospital with infectious diseases?
I mean, it's incredibly important. Yeah. It doesn't really matter what level of job you have in any kind of an organization. I mean, in our office, we have, there are obviously lawyers. There are young associate lawyers. There are paralegals. There are secretaries. We have people who do filing. I mean, the person who does filing is as important to me as my partner who's another attorney. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for being in this morning and understanding this particular case. And, and for doing that pro bono work to help a family who desperately needed your assistance.
I mean, he was a first responder. He was putting his life on the line for other people for no compensation whatsoever. And this was one of, I've been doing this for over 40 years, and being able to handle or hand over this check to the widow and the son.
Thank you.
Was something I'll never forget.
Thank you very much.